So what we're here to talk about a lot is about how the Asian companies are both affecting the West and how they're changing as well, I think. And so one of the things I was hoping that you could talk about is how the Asian game makers are kind of getting more in the news, and also the perception among Western companies and even the Western press about them.
Sure. Well, I think you know, it's interesting that the games industry overall is changing pretty rapidly, as everybody knows. You know, the games industry seems to be worldwide seems to be moving more along the lines of the business models and the approach to game development that were prevalent or were sort of invented in places like Korea and then a little later China, you know, more than 10 years ago. So Nexon, the company that I work for, created the first graphic MMORPG called Kingdom of the Winds in the mid-90s. Our founder was actually kicked out of graduate school for making the company in his dorm room, which in those days you used to get kicked out, not hailed as it wasn't a good thing, it was considered a bad thing in Korea. That's changed. But and then Nexon stumbled across. I mean, literally, we like to think that we invented it, but we sort of stumbled across the free-to-play business. We had a game that was failing, and we decided to just make it free. And of course, our monthly active user count exploded after that. It's just about 12, 13 years ago. And we thought, well, that's interesting. And then for a variety of reasons, we started to put virtual goods into the game. And we kept experimenting, but I remember being in Electronic Arts, you know, 7, 10 years ago. And the whole business here was based off of $60, 60-hour packaged goods experience that you would buy on a shiny disc in Best Buy or Walmart. And you know, 7 years ago, that business was long gone in Korea. And really what was taking over was either subscription or free-to-play based models. So you'd be in Seoul, and nobody would talk about packaged goods, and you'd be in California, and nobody would talk about free-to-play. Right. That's obviously changing. And I think what's changing is people are starting to look at the P&Ls of companies like Nexon. You know, we're about $1.3 billion US. The top line, we run 40% operating income margins. We're growing at about 25% year over year. So people look at that and they say, well, there's something really interesting there. What has been interesting, I think, in the West, if you think about this sort of dichotomy as these come together, really the innovation in free-to-play has been around casual games in the West. And there's a lot of casual games in places like Japan, Korea, and China, obviously, but really they took the free-to-play model and brought it to immersive games.
Right. Well, and also what's interesting, I think, is that if you look at even the more hardcore games, you've got like League of Legends starting to impact World of Warcraft, right? Which is also, I mean, it's going up the value chain as well. You've got even EA, right, moving their Star Wars game to free-to-play.
Well, I think that the brilliance of League of Legends is and some of the speakers before were talking about this earlier this morning, the brilliance of League of Legends is they just did not focus on over monetization. And they had patient capital, and unlike a lot of game companies that you've seen in the last 5 years that have been sort of latching on to free-to-play, they think free-to-play means ARPU and ARPU maximization. And that was true in Japan as well, or has been true in Japan, but really free-to-play is about, in the immersive game space, is about creating a really great experience and keeping users in that great experience for a long time. We have about 70 million monthly active users around the world, and only about 10% of our players ever pay us anything. But of those that do, our average revenue per paying user per month is a little over $20. So
is that sustainable over the long term?
Well, it's been extremely sustainable for, you know, the 12 years or so that we've been doing it. It's just gotten, you know, bigger MAUs, bigger pay rates, bigger ARPUs. And when you look at the cohorts of gamers who come into the game, you know, it's sort of like when I remember when I first started using iTunes, you know, years ago. I bought I downloaded one or two songs, and then the next month I bought more, and the month after that I bought more. So once I became a payer, I tended to buy more over time. And you see, as you watch the cohorts in game after game, they tend to go up. So when you launch a game, it starts off very small and then it tends to build up over time. And it takes patience and patient capital to do that well.
Right. So where do you think the Asian game companies are headed at this point?
Well, I think it's interesting. I think that the definition of Asian game company is going to change. You know, we're one of those companies that was founded in Asia that a lot of people didn't know about, even though we were much bigger than most Western game companies. But we've just made a string of minority investments in one acquisition in the last 3 or 4 months or so. thesis about how we want to do that, but we're all over the world. Our largest countries or our largest source of revenue is China, our second largest is in Japan, our third is in Korea, where we were founded. But we obviously think that there's a massive opportunity in the West.
And not you alone, right? SoftBank, obviously, very famous.
And SoftBank did their deal with Supercell, and of course Tencent owns Riot. And so I think really what we're seeing in our, as an example for us, we're very self-consciously trying to be an international company. It's very hard to do international. It's actually very, very hard.
Well, there aren't that many. Even the largest ones in the West aren't truly international. If you wanted to use the term like Sony, for example, is a truly international company.
Yeah.
Right. So it's really, really hard.
We actually changed this is not necessarily East and West, but in order to force fit ourselves to be international, we were founded in Korea about 7 years ago. We changed our headquarters outside of Korea because we wanted to force ourselves to think about a game market other than Korea. So we moved to Tokyo, which is in the same time zone, it's only about an hour away by plane. But we thought about California, but we thought that was too hard, so we made it Tokyo. But that forced us to think very international.
Sure. So right now still, despite the changes that are happening in the Western world and the kind of rise of game companies that mimic your models, we still have the large consoles, right? We have mobile devices. How do you see that playing into your strategy?
Well, my sense is that the consoles will do a lot in the first 1 or 2 years, but we're not thinking much about consoles. And the reason why that is because when you think about where the technology is going, just even think 5 years ago, so about one console cycle, 5 or 6 years ago, the difference between a game-playable PC and a game-playable mobile device was enormous. A PC is either on your desktop or it's a 10-pound laptop, and it's got about a 45-minute battery life, and it plays StarCraft. And a game-playable mobile device did not play a very good game. Today, the difference between those two is largely defined by the difference between a MacBook Air and an iPad. They're very close. They're very similar devices.
And the uptake of controllers.
And the uptake of controllers. So, that device has no keyboard, a lower-end GPU, and lower-end networking. But other than those 3 things, they're very, very similar. When you project out merely 2 years, they're pretty much the same device. So it's not hard to imagine. And in fact, just talking to Samsung and Apple and Google, they're clearly thinking about this. You and I walk up to the big screen and we start playing a console-quality game because we have a workstation sitting in our pocket,
right,
or on our hip. And the input device is something that we choose. I like keyboard and mouse. I don't particularly like glass for gaming, but a lot of people can play off of glass. Other people want a controller. And it's not hard to think about the industry going in that direction. So with that, if those devices, if a console is sitting on your hip, then you don't really need a device that's attached to your TV set 100% of the time. And when I look at my kids play games, they'll oftentimes, most of the time, they're playing off a laptop and a tablet in front of a dead 60-inch screen with a couple consoles attached. They're just not interested.
So maybe we should adjust thinking toward console quality games,
yes,
right? So, right now, I think it's arguable that there are very few games that would even come close to that on mobile devices. So where, how do we get to that?
That's changing. Yeah, the technology helps with that. And I also think, I think there's also needs to be, I hope for a shift in mindset among Western game developers. When you think about a mobile device right now, you think mostly about a casual game. And I think that's too bad because you can make a very good immersive game and deliver it on a tablet. And when you do that well, or even on a mobile phone, when you do that well, you find that your metrics for monetization, your metrics for users are as good, or if not better, than on a PC. So what really drove this home for us was about a year ago, we bought a game company in Japan called Gloops. And Gloops made, at that time, primarily browser-based mobile games. So browser-based mobile games, you think, really high user count and really tiny monetization, low pay rates, conversion pay, and low ARPUs. In fact, we compared they were mostly a Japan company, we compared their metrics, those 3 numbers, against our metrics in Japan. And what we found was they had roughly double the number of MAUs that our PC business had in Japan. So apples to apples, they were double, which is not really a big surprise because it's mobile. Their pay rates were the same. Their ARPUs were the same as our PC business. not even native.
Right.
They were on a browser on a small device. They were, as developers though, they loved RPGs. They loved Lineage, and they loved Ultima, and Final Fantasy, you know, these great RPG games that they sort of grown up playing. They wanted to deliver that on a mobile device. So we've seen that over and over, and the things that we've been looking for are deeply immersive games. Meaning, by immersive, I mean not necessarily hardcore, but games that are relatively early, easy to learn, and relatively hard to master. And when you have deeply immersive games, you tend to keep your users for a long period of time. As we found with our metrics, the longer you keep a user, the better your economics are. Frankly, you're in a more fun part of the business. So going back to the question of, you know, how are Asian game companies and Western game companies sort of, how are those changing? You know, my hope for the Western game development community is, and our message to them is, don't make junk. Don't, you know, you got into the games business, if you're a games developer, you got into the games business because you love games. And a lot of what you see in the App Store are casual games that were based off of sort of a fast follower strategy. And fast follower really is a euphemism for copycat. And copycat means commodity. And commodity means really hard to sell, which is why the marketing costs in the app stores are going up so much. So, but yet we're all in this business because, or most of us are in this business because we actually love games. And we want to play unique games that delight us because we've never seen anything like it before. And those games, when you make them and you tune them and they're fun, delight millions of people. And so what we want to do is take our 70 million monthly active users around the world and our knowledge of how to monetize that, and we want to bring that to people who are gamers, who are core gamers. So what I'm hoping is that there's this combination of Eastern innovation and free-to-play, and combined with great Western sensibilities for game making and art and gameplay, and put those two together, and that will make for a much better industry.
Do you think that the era of our $60 buy a disc or whatever equivalent, right, download, is that coming to an end, or do you think that both of these models can kind of exist in parallel?
Yes, I think it's coming to an end.
Okay.
I mean, I don't really envy anybody, you know, my former colleagues at EA or Activision or whatever. I don't envy anybody trying to sell a $60 disc as an investment. I think that's just a massively difficult challenge. In a world of free-to-play, YouTube, dollar downloads of music, I mean, we're cutting up the content in such interesting ways so that you don't have to make this massive decision to buy a $60 game. That's a very hard market problem.
At the other end of it, of course, is you have people like, you know, I have family members who play these games on mobile, and they say, I don't want to hand out a damn dime, right? I just want to play the game. So they got it for free, and it kind of diminishes the value that they see of these games.
Well, I totally agree. I mean, I think a lot of that, though, is the way that the industry has been doing free-to-play in the West. And you've seen this happen over and over again, and even very recently, some of the great games that have come out and converted to free-to-play. And they're not really free-to-play. They're free-to-play in the way that a Korean game company or a Chinese game company that's been through it for a few years thinks about it is, it's really free. And you can play, again, 90% of our users never pay us a dime.
Right.
And they play with us for 8, 10 years. That's a free-to-play game. If you make a game where you can't realistically progress in the game and still have fun without paying money, that's not a free-to-play game. That's an Airsat's pay-to-play game. And gamers are smart. Even new gamers are smart. And they say, why don't you just get rid of this paywall here? This is just a paywall. Just make me pay for the game up front, and then I'll be happy playing it. That's not really free-to-play. That's part of the challenge that I think that we have, because a lot of companies are focused on monetization. We made that exact same mistake 10 years ago. It was a big mistake when we stopped it pretty quickly.
So I think we only have about 5 minutes, but I was curious about when we look at the quality of these games as well. You know, one of the reasons I enjoy playing games is for the storylines. You know, the mechanics are almost second to that a lot of the time. And so I think about it and I see these storylines, these games like The Last of Us or Grand Theft Auto, they take tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars to make. That's almost impossible to recoup those costs in a free-to-play model rather quickly, right? I mean, you're looking at a much larger time horizon that you have to put out a ton of money and then come up with it later, right?
Well, I think yes. I think there's a lot of things going on. So first of all, we introduce a game after a shorter period of time of development because we're going to make our revenue over time. So we'll launch a game, and if it resonates with our user base, we keep investing in the game.
It's only a percentage of the planned games out there to begin with.
That's right. And then we do what we call live development, and we keep investing in the game over a period of years. And if it doesn't do well, we cut it off and go to the next game. If it does do well, we keep investing in it. So as a result, you could say our efficiencies relative to ROI are much better, but we have to be much more patient because any game that we launch in a given year will not make a meaningful impact on our P&L. So in that sense, it was almost completely inverse to the traditional games business, right? Where it goes up and then it goes into scale over a period of months or whatever. Ours, the games that we're launching over the last 12 months, with the exception of FIFA Online 3 in Korea with Electronic Arts, none of those will make a meaningful impact on our P&L for the next 18 months. You know, it's something that I really notice is watching our big revenue sources run well.
So that means investors are going to have to take a different view of some of these companies as well if they do indeed change their business model.
Yeah, it's hard as if you're a public company, you got to make a quarter. It's hard to make a transition to free product. Yeah, that's right. That's one thing. The other thing is, we could spend a lot of time talking about graphics fidelity and whether that really matters. When I think about the games that I most love of the last 10 years, very few of them are near the state-of-the-art graphics fidelity. So, because the console cycles, graphics fidelity has been a differentiator in the past. But again, go through SimCity, Minecraft, MapleStory from Nexon. You go down the list. Of course, Nintendo in the last console cycle. None of those games were near the Dungeon Fighter, which is the biggest game in China. Which, by the way, China has lots of good graphics fidelity games, but Dungeon Fighter is not one of them. It's a very good game. Right? The graphics fidelity is just but one way to differentiate a game, but it's not necessarily. It's definitely not the only one. It's not even necessarily the best one. And so, but graphics fidelity is also coincidentally the quickest way to spend money in game development that I know of. Right. And you can find yourself employing hundreds of artists as you final a game, and that's hard to do. But again, I would go back to just make fun games, and some of the best, most fun games have nothing to do with graphics fidelity. So,
how do you acclimate the Western game buyers who are used to putting out $60 a pop or more to this new model? Like that's got to be a hard thing too.
I think it's very hard because it goes against all our instincts as Western game. I mean, what I've learned since I've come to Nexon has been, it's really, I've gone to school. It was very hard for me to learn, even though I thought I knew it when I was outside of Nexon before. I think a great example is, we have a very close relationship with Valve, and we created a game together called Counter-Strike Online. We now work very closely with Electronic Arts for FIFA Online 3, which is the #2 game in Korea now. It's done phenomenally well. And I think EA took a very enlightened approach to just saying, we'll see how it works.
Right. Which is a lot of them, right? I mean, Bobby Kotick's doing the same thing as Strauss.
That's right. Yeah.
So do you think that the testing these models in Asia, that's what it is that they're testing it, and that they want to bring it back to the United States as it works?
We'll see. We'll see how much the innovators will get in the way of that.
Yeah.
You've got a lot of revenue to protect. What I would do is just, we don't have that problem because we don't have it. We only have about $150 million business in the West. It's growing, but we don't have that huge business. But they always say you got to eat your own meal before someone else eats. So I think it's worth it for people to really invest in that.
Any closing thoughts?
Let's see. I'm hoping that Western game makers continue to pursue free-to-play and that they really pursue their passion, which is making great games. And don't copy stuff because the road to a good business is not about copying games.
Thank you.
Thank you.